So, I'm going to open up our conversation here by talking about some of the opposites that I heard today that I hadn't heard described that way before. So, I learned the difference between human trafficking and human smuggling. I didn't really understand that difference before. I also heard the difference between advocacy and lobbying. And these were fascinating topics for me. I don't know, did anybody else feel anything like that? The smuggling being what we generally hear about in the news, what is actually smuggling is often referred to as trafficking. And I think that was
especially with those 134 children that actually, it was trafficking.
Yes, yes. We heard about it as smuggling, and we heard about it as, forgive me, their fault or a bad thing, and we didn't really truly understand the kind of exploitation that was going on at that time.
The interesting part is to look at how the Canadian government looks at it versus the United States government, and to see where we have a crossover and what we can learn from each other.
I was fascinated to hear from Robin that we in the United States have the best systems in place, and I'm like, okay, we might have a federal level series of systems, but I can assure you that that has not trickled down to the state of Washington.
So
at all. So the
more
system,
opposites in a sense.
Exactly. The system may be in place, but nothing's happening yet. It's going to be our stuff to do.
Do I understand, though, when I talked about something, is there are federal laws in place, but if it's easier to get a conviction on, say, being a John versus trafficking, they'll go with the easiest conviction, and that's one of our problems.
Right.
Is, if it's prostitution, we can get you in a conviction and, doesn't take care of the problem. Instead, we don't look at, well, it'd be harder to get somebody on the federal trafficking piece.
Okay, keep going. I'm going to go tap on people.
I'm going to do a reverse tap here.
A reverse tap?
They're not tapping us very well.
Yeah, so keep talking.
Well, picking up what Carol said about trafficking and punishment or catching or laws related to that for the Johns in prostitution and the pimps in trafficking, we have legislation on the books federally, but there's not much happening with it in our country. I understand that Washington and Oregon are bringing in really strong laws that are going to be forcefully, I've lost the word, sorry. Prosecuted. So I think that even though we're in two completely different jurisdictions, Oregon and Washington are two completely jurisdictions, I learned today, in terms of you have separate state laws. You don't have an overarching federal law. So before I'd always thought, oh, there's us, the Canadians, and there's them, the Americans. And they can help each other out, and we're kind of up here on our own. And what I realized today was we're all completely separate jurisdictions bringing in things in a different way, so we can work together, informing each other. Here's what we're doing here. It doesn't mean that just because we're in another country that we can't do that work on our federal legislators.
And that's advocacy.
And that's advocacy, exactly.
So in your discussion today, Kate,
yes.
I'm curious what other people might have thought about, what can I take away from that and go back and do some advocacy work, and then the thread just nicely flowed through the day.
And I'm hoping that that's what people will do in their groups and go out and realize.
I'm going to change the subject because I heard a very depressing comment about 7 generations for rehabilitation. That's 250 years. Are people really going to take that long to recover from things that have traumatized them? Do you think?
Isn't 7 generations only 150?
Well, depending on how old you are when you get married.
Only 150.
Well, that's interesting because I think I might have missed that session. I didn't get to go to all the sessions today. So can you
Well, I mean, bad things have happened to people through the millennia. But I felt that maybe one or two, and the third generation for sure, would have gotten over it, would have said, this really bad happened to me or my grandfather, but I'm not going to let it affect me. And it just depressed me all to hell to think that it's going to affect them for 7 generations.
Well, nobody has, it'll keep affecting them for even many more than that until, I think, you have a truth and reconciliation process. Each side, affected party, needs to own what happened in order to ever possibly be able to get beyond it.
But even if it was your grandfather
Turks
that
and the Armenians
did
have been fighting for 1,000 years for the same
there
thing.
comes a time when you say, look, my grandfather, great-grandfather was very mistaken in what he tried to do or did. But I can't wear that guilt for 7 generations. My children, I'm not putting that on my grandchildren.
But I think part of the 7 generation thing is not so much what the actual event was, but the impact of the event, how it travels down the generations. So you get, for example, a First Nations child who was taken in the 1800s to a residential school and physically, sexually, mentally, emotionally abused for 10, 12 years. They come out, they have no sense of parenting skills, communication emotionally, so they get into a relationship where they have children and they push them away, they beat them, they're in a lot of pain, they turn to alcohol. The next generation is suffering the effects of that middle generation growing up. And I think that's why it filters down 7 generations until it's the impact from generation to generation of that original action, but it changes as it goes through and people start to realize that, you know, my parents did the best they could, but given what they had, that was all they could do. And I can make a difference now.
Bless you, Sue, for being so kind to answer her question so well. I just would have slapped her and said, you're being way too simplistic on that chick, because you made the assumption that they understand that they're in error.
One of the things I heard, to put it on an upward motion, is that one of the things that will help that recovery and maybe make it earlier than 7 generations would be the arts. They're underappreciated and underutilized. And the example was given about 2 different cultures that are at a standoff in terms of how they work with each other, but when you give them an art project, they work together. So maybe our emphasis needs to be positive and we need to incorporate more arts into our life.
And interestingly, I noticed in the video that first traffic person was painting while she talked.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That was quite, and they never put it together. And never put it together until the end that she was probably made to paint, because that was and sorry, you know, I'm the engineer, so I don't really get painting that well. I can do.
Well, but then in the reconciliation with the arms,
Yeah.
on the different threads. So again, the art was there.
Yeah, and there is art therapy, you know, that's used constantly in helping people who have suffered brain damage. It helps them deal with their anger through art therapy, music therapy, the same. So it's a tragedy that those are the very areas that in times of fiscal restraint are being cut back in education, because they're the things that probably could be of great use to individuals who come to school, to work, and inside they're hurting. And the only way they know to express that externally is through somewhat or extremely antisocial behavior. So the whole process of the truth and reconciliation is facing up to what has occurred and how you respond to it. And from that, the restorative justice aspect ties into that very much, into the reconciliation.
I was just going to say that's a great segue.
Yeah. So, and also the advocacy. You know, having people who are willing to stand up for you and say, I want to help you get what you deserve, which is a healthy life. You know, that this impact isn't going to be ruling your life anymore, because there are other people out here who care about you. And that's so much what happens to individuals. They have this sense that there's nobody there for me. And in the Healing Reconciliation video, it was, I mean, a 10-year-old child out on the street. Why was there nobody there for her? And that boy who was behind his bicycle spoke. He said, because it wasn't that I was smart, I was looking for something. You know, those are the things that grabbed me and pulled all of this together.
And I like how we're starting to talk about moving from what we heard into discussions about action, about help, about what we're all here for, which as Zonta members, it's about how do we contribute, and we contribute through advocacy, we contribute through service, we contribute through global awareness of learning, we contribute in many, many ways. And I don't know, I think that one of the most powerful things, and I said it this morning for me today, was the absolute lack of awareness I really had about the internet, the shift in how this is happening and what's happening on the internet. And I'm going to go home and I'm going to remind my kids, talking about my grandkids, you know, thinking about that and looking at it a little bit differently than I have before. It was a good takeaway from me today.
Well, in addition to taking that away, I just want to share some information with you about the traumatized brain. When a brain is traumatized, the left brain doesn't work very well. That's why they can't do critical thinking or think reasonably or normally. So when a person is traumatized, they are very right brain. So to access healing, you have to go through the right brain, which means music, art, movement, Tai Chi. You know, you don't even have to talk, because talking is very left brain. So when you go see a counselor, it doesn't really help. In fact, you can re-traumatize them. But if you do right brain activity, exercise, yoga, eating, singing, just having fun with friends.
Which all boils down and nets out to emotion.
Yes.
As opposed to critical thinking.
Yes. Yeah. But when the right brain starts to heal, then the left brain helps.
Great. And thank you, Jean. That brings us back to why are we here today? Mm-hmm. We've got this whole wonderful, I'm new to, I haven't been in Zonta for a long, long time. And I'm overwhelmed to think how many people came, how many friends I really feel I have now. And I'm inspired. And I'm so thankful that you put on this where is Pat? And so thank you. I'm feeling a little emotional. But I have to say, listening to everything today, it all brings us down to we have one vision. And that's what we're probably going to take away from here today. It's the message of what we're going to do when we go back. And for everyone that we talk to, it'll just go out and the family will spread and spread, and we can be an advocate. We can start helping people. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to suggest. So, from my perspective, that's a fishbowl exercise. We wanted to use it to sort of sum up what we were thinking during the day and some of the activities that went on during the day. I recognize it's been a long day, and it's a long drive out here, and it's a long drive back in. But I encourage you to continue that kind of a conversation. I know it'll keep happening. Encourage you to continue with that and to really reflect back on all of the things that we've learned today and what we can do with them as we go forward. So thank you to my fishbowl participants, particularly those who had no idea why I was asking you to volunteer. And for those of you who think, oh, I had something, but I didn't really want to come up and say it, keep talking. Keep talking. So that's my bit. Thank you very much. Thank you.